I never thought I'd be telling this story. Even now, my hands tremble as I type these words, trying to capture an experience that defies earthly description. But after what Jesus showed me, after witnessing why so many souls never reach heaven's gates, I can no longer remain silent. The truth burns within me, demanding to be shared. Before all of this, I was just Sarah Mitchell, a night shift nurse at Mercy General Hospital in Cincinnati. 15 years of working in the emergency room had hardened me to death's presence. I'd held countless hands as their owners slipped away, whispered final comforts to the dying, and called countless times of death in that sterile fluorescent light. I thought I understood death. I was wrong, so terribly, completely wrong. Thus, night everything changed started like any other. October 12th, 2023. I remember checking my watch as I left the hospital, 2:47 a.m. The autumn air had that crisp bite that makes you pull your jacket closer, and fallen leaves skidded across the empty parking lot. My mind was already at home, imagining the quiet house where my husband Tom and our 2 teenagers would be sleeping just 20 minutes, and I'd be crawling into bed myself. I never saw the truck that ran the red light. They told me later that the driver had fallen asleep at the wheel, but in that moment, all I registered was a flash of headlights and the deafening crunch of metal meeting metal at 60 miles per hour. Time seemed to slow, like honey dripping from a spoon. I watched my coffee cup float upward, dark liquid suspended in mid-air, like tiny planets in orbit. The airbag deployed in a cloud of white powder, and I had one crystal clear thought. This is how it ends. The impact felt like being hit by a freight train. Pain exploded through my chest and head. Then, nothing. Absolute nothing. People talk about seeing a tunnel of light or floating above their body, but my experience was different. One moment, I was in my crumpled Honda Civic, and the next, I was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere impossible. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of a quiet room, but a profound absence of sound that seemed to press against my ears like cotton wool. The air, if you could call it that, felt thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made every hair on my bodies stand on end. And the darkness, it wasn't the darkness of a moonless night or a windowless room. This darkness had substance, had weight. It felt alive. That's when I heard his voice. I say heard, but that's not quite right. The words seemed to bypass my ears entirely, resonating directly within my soul. "Sarah," he said, and in that single word was contained all the love and knowledge of the universe. "There are things you need to see." I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but I had no voice. No body really, though I still felt like me. Instead, I simply existed, suspended in that living darkness, as Jesus began to show me why so many souls never find their way to heaven. What he revealed would shatter everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the choices we make every single day. The first vision hit me like a tidal wave. Author's note: this opening section continues for approximately 10,000 words, establishing the narrator's credibility through her medical background and setting up the devastating accident that leads to her near-death experience. The narrative focuses on sensory details and emotional authenticity while building tension toward the revelations to come. Would you like the darkness shattered like glass, and suddenly I was floating near the ceiling of my own car. Time seemed meaningless. Had it been seconds since the crash? Minutes? I watched in detached fascination as first responders swarmed around my crumpled Honda Civic. their red and blue lights painting everything in alternate washes of color. Their movements seemed oddly slow, like watching a movie played at half speed. No pulse. Starting compressions. A young paramedic with close-cropped dark hair straddled my body awkwardly through the shattered driver's side window. His partner worked to stabilize my neck, her face tight with concentration. I wanted to tell them I was fine, that they didn't need to worry, but of course, they couldn't hear me. The strangest part was how calm I felt. I should have been terrified. I was watching my own death, after all, but fear seemed as distant and irrelevant as a dream from childhood. Instead, I felt curious, peaceful, like I was watching a play where I happened to know one of the actors. They loaded my body into the ambulance, and I followed, drifting through the metal roof as easily as passing through a soap bubble. The paramedic was still doing compressions, calling out numbers and medical terms I knew by heart from my years as a nurse. But now they seemed like artifacts from another life, growing fainter and less important with each passing moment. That's when I noticed the light. It started as a pinprick of warmth, like the first ray of dawn breaking through storm clouds. But this light didn't come from above. It seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. It grew steadily brighter, not painfully so, but with an intensity that seemed to fill every corner of existence. The light carried with it a sensation I can only describe as pure love, but even that falls pathetically short. Imagine every moment of joy, peace, and acceptance you've ever experienced, multiplied by infinity, and you might begin to approach what I felt in that moment. I began to feel a gentle but insistent pull toward the light, the ambulance, the paramedics, even my own broken body below. All of it started to fade like morning mist under a rising sun. Every worry, every earthly concern, every attachment I'd ever had seemed to dissolve in that radiance. I understood, with perfect clarity, that I was leaving behind not just my body, but the entire framework of physical existence. Sarah. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, filling me with a recognition so profound, it brought what felt like tears. Though I no longer had eyes to cry with, I knew that voice. Every soul that has ever existed would know that voice. It resonated, not in my ears, but in the very essence of my being. There is much you need to understand. The voice continued, and with each word, the light grew brighter. I felt myself being drawn further from the earthly realm, watching as the hospital emergency room, where they were working on my body, receded into insignificance. Through the growing radiance, I began to perceive a presence, not a physical form, nothing so mundane, but a concentration of love and wisdom, so intense it defied description. I knew with absolute certainty that I was in the presence of Jesus Christ, not the sanitized version from stained glass windows, or the distant figure from Sunday school lessons, but the living, breathing essence of divine love and truth. And then he began to show me why I had been brought here. The light coalesced, forming scenes and visions that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and the choices we make. What I witnessed in those moments, even now, months later, I struggle to put it into words. But I must try, because what Jesus revealed about why so many souls never reach heaven isn't just shocking. It's a truth that every living person desperately needs to understand. The first vision he showed me struck me like a bolt of lightning to my soul. Author's note. This section continues for several thousand more words, detailing Sarah's initial experiences in the spiritual realm and building anticipation for the revelations to come. The narrative maintains a balance between the mystical elements and grounded, relatable, the light concentrated and coalesced, taking on a form that both was and wasn't human. How do you describe someone who exists beyond the boundaries of physical reality? Even now, months later, I struggle to find the right words. It's like trying to explain color to someone who has never seen, or music to someone who has never heard. But I'll try, because what happened next changed everything. His presence filled existence itself. Imagine standing before an ocean of light that somehow contained all the love in the universe, yet concentrated into a being you could almost comprehend. The radiance emanating from him made the sun seem like a candle flame in comparison. Yet I could look at him without being overwhelmed. His eyes, those eyes held galaxies of wisdom and depths of compassion I never knew could exist. They burned with holy fire, not the consuming kind that destroys, but the kind that purifies and transforms. Looking into those eyes, I saw myself as I truly was. Every flaw, every failure, every moment of doubt, and felt not judgment, but perfect, complete acceptance. When he spoke, his voice resonated through every particle of my being. It carried the weight of authority that created universes, yet held the gentle tenderness of a father comforting his child. Sarah, he said, and in that single word, I heard echoes of every name I'd ever been called, every identity I'd ever held, every possibility I could ever become. My child, he continued, and tears that weren't tears streamed down my face. That wasn't a face. I have brought you here for a purpose. What I am about to show you must be shared with my people. They are walking in darkness, believing they walk in light. They are lost, believing they are found. The time grows short, and they must know the truth. The magnitude of what he was saying crashed over me like a wave. Me, I was just a nurse from Cincinnati, someone who struggled to keep her teenagers off their phones during family dinner. What did I know about sharing divine revelations? The doubt must have shown in whatever passed for my expression in that realm, because his eyes softened with infinite understanding. Lord, I managed to say, though I wasn't speaking with a physical voice, I'm nobody special. I'm just me. Who would believe me? I don't have a theology degree. I've never even read the whole Bible straight through. Surely there's someone more qualified. He smiled then, and it was like watching the dawn of creation. Sarah, when have I ever chosen the qualified? I chose shepherds to hear the announcement of my birth. I chose fishermen to spread my gospel. I chose a persecutor to write my letters. I have always used the humble to confound the wise, the weak to shame the strong. You think your doubts disqualify you. Your doubts qualify you. Because you question, you will speak with humility. Because you struggle to understand, you will explain with patience. His words washed over me like warm rain, dissolving my protests before they could form. But still, the enormity of what he was asking felt overwhelming. But Lord, what if I get it wrong? What if I can't find the right words? What if, peace, child? His voice carried such authority that my doubts fell silent. You won't be speaking your words. You'll be speaking mine. I'm not asking you to convince anyone. I'm asking you to testify to what you see. The truth carries its own power. He extended his hand then. Not a physical hand, but I don't know how else to describe it. It was like being offered pure love in a gesture. Come, he said. There are things you must see. Things my children have forgotten. Things they need to remember before it's too late. As I reached for his hand, reality itself seemed to bend and shift around us. The endless light began to change, taking on new forms and dimensions. What you're about to witness, he said, his voice growing more serious, is why so many souls never reach heaven. You'll see both the obvious reasons and the subtle ones. The things my children do knowingly, and the things they do in ignorance. Both lead to the same destination. I felt his grip tighten, not physically, but spiritually, as the scene around us began to transform. Remember everything, he told me. Every detail, every emotion, every truth. Because when you return, you must share it all. And then we were somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I never could have imagined. Somewhere that would show me truths I never could have discovered on my own. What I saw in those next moments would forever change my understanding of salvation, of faith, of what it truly means to follow Christ. Author's note: this section continues for several thousand more words, building the relationship between Sarah and Jesus, while establishing the gravity of what she's about to witness. The narrative maintains a balance between divine authority and human. The scene before us transformed, and suddenly we were floating above a city I almost recognized, but not quite. It was like looking at a familiar photograph that had been subtly altered. The skyscrapers gleamed with surfaces that seemed alive, shifting with waves of data and light. Cars moved in perfect synchronization. No traffic lights needed. The air was cleaner than I'd ever seen in an urban center, and everything had an aura of efficiency and prosperity. Watch carefully, Jesus said, his voice carrying a weight of sorrow that made my soul ache. See how the enemy works, not through force, but through convenience, through progress, through solutions to problems people didn't even know they had. We descended into the streets, moving among the people like ghosts. A woman hurried past us, late for work. She raised her hand to a sleek panel by a coffee shop door, and I watched as a tiny light beneath her skin pulsed once. The door opened automatically, and a barista was already preparing her usual order. "Good morning, Ms. Chen," the barista called out. "Your favorite dark roast with oat milk. The payment's already processed through your Palm Pay chip." The woman smiled, grabbed her coffee, and hurried on. Everything about the interaction was smooth, efficient, convenient, perfect. "This is how it begins," Jesus said softly, "not with violence or coercion, but with small comforts, little conveniences that make life easier. Watch." The scene shifted to a Sunday morning. We were in a megachurch, all gleaming glass and polished wood. The congregation was massive, easily several thousand people. As they filed in, each person passed their hands over sleek sensors. With each scan, their names appeared on massive screens, along with their attendance record and giving history. "Brother James," a greeter called out warmly to an elderly man, "thank you for your faithful giving. We've adjusted your tithe withdrawal to account for your recent blessing. That raise at work. Isn't technology wonderful? No more carrying cash or writing checks. Just a simple scan, and you're storing up treasures in heaven." The elderly man beamed, but I felt Jesus' grief intensify beside me. "They do not see," he said. "They do not understand that with each small step, they're being prepared for a much darker purpose." We moved through time and space, witnessing scene after scene. A mother checking her children in at school with palm scans, relieved by the security it provided. A doctor accessing patient records instantly through his implanted chip. A missionary in a remote village processing donations through his biometric reader. Everything was seamless, secure, efficient. Then the scene shifted again, and we were in what appeared to be a government briefing room. A man in an expensive suit stood before a panel of world leaders. His presence was magnetic, his smile captivating. Something about him made my soul recoil, though I couldn't say why. The Global Biosecure Initiative is proceeding ahead of schedule, he announced smoothly. 87% of developed nations have already integrated the basic infrastructure. The public's response has been overwhelmingly positive. They see the benefits. No more identity theft, seamless travel, instant access to medical records in emergencies. And the religious community support has been particularly valuable. The scene shifted to a panel of religious leaders, pastors, priests, rabbis, imams, all nodding in agreement as they discuss the technology's benefits. God gives us wisdom to improve life for all, one prominent televangelist declared. These advances are a blessing, a way to protect our congregations and streamline His work. Lord, I whispered, horror growing in my heart. Are these people, these religious leaders, are they deliberately deceiving their followers? Some are, Jesus replied, his voice heavy with sorrow, but most are themselves deceived. Remember, Satan appears as an angel of light. His greatest deceptions come wrapped in righteousness. Watch now, for this is where the path begins to darken. The scenes began to shift more rapidly. I saw social pressure mounting against those who refused the implants. Job applications denied, travel restricted, children excluded from schools, bank accounts frozen, all in the name of security, efficiency, progress. Lord, I asked, my voice trembling, are we seeing the mark of the beast? Jesus turned. To me, his eyes filled with both love and urgent warning. Not yet. This is merely the preparation, the gradual conditioning of hearts and minds. The true mark will come later, and it will require a conscious choice, a deliberate pledge of allegiance. But this is how the ground is prepared. This is how hearts are slowly hardened, how discernment is gradually eroded, how truth becomes unclear, even to those who claim to love it. He gestured at the scenes continuing to unfold before us. They will not be forced to take the mark when it comes. They will choose it, believing it to be good, right, even holy. That is the ultimate deception. The narrative continues for many more pages, detailing specific examples of how technology and convenience gradually reshape society's understanding of security, privacy, and freedom, leading to a state where accepting the ultimate deception becomes a natural next step, rather than a shocking departure. The scenes before us began to accelerate, each one darker than the last. I watched as the world descended into chaos, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but a slow, crushing collapse that wore people down day by day. Banks failed, supply chains crumbled. A new disease, far worse than anything we'd seen before, swept through cities like wildfire. Nations blamed each other, and wars erupted over dwindling resources. Now, watch, Jesus said softly, how the enemy uses desperation to make the unthinkable seem necessary. The same charismatic leader we'd seen before appeared on screens worldwide, his presence somehow even more compelling than before. But now I could see what I hadn't noticed earlier, a darkness behind his eyes, a void where a soul should be. My fellow citizens of Earth, he began, his voice carrying an almost hypnotic quality. We have endured unprecedented challenges, but today I bring you hope. Today we implement the solution that will restore order, prosperity, and peace. The scene shifted to massive distribution centers being set up in cities across the world. People lined up for blocks, their faces a mixture of desperation and relief. The process looked simple, almost beautiful. A quick scan, a moment of discomfort, and then a smile of peace would spread across each person's face. Lord, I whispered, they look so happy. Watch their spirits, he replied, his voice heavy with grief. And then I saw it. With each implantation, something fundamental changed in the recipient. It was like watching a light being extinguished. But more than that, it was like watching a door slam shut between the person and heaven itself. They could still smile, still laugh, still pray. But their prayers hit a ceiling of brass. Their worship was just words. The divine spark that marked them as beings, made in God's image, was altered into something else, something manufactured. They're still alive, I said, horror growing in my heart. But they're spiritually transformed. Jesus completed my thought. The technology they accept does more than mark their bodies. It rewrites the very essence of what makes them human. They can no longer hear my voice, no longer feel my spirit's leading. They have chosen a counterfeit salvation, a false peace, and with it, eternal separation from me. We moved through the crowds, watching as people eagerly accepted what they thought was salvation. Religious leaders blessed the process, calling it God's provision for troubled times. Pastors encouraged their congregations to participate, quoting scriptures about submission to authority and caring for one's family. See how complete the deception is, Jesus said. They believe they are doing right. Many even believe they are serving me by accepting this mark, but they can no longer discern truth from lies. The capacity for spiritual understanding has been altered within them. I watched a young mother scan her hand to buy food for her children, watched the subtle change come over her as something eternal was lost. But Lord, I pleaded, she's just trying to feed her family. How can this be fair? I have provided ways for my faithful to endure, he replied, but they must choose to trust me, even when all earthly wisdom says otherwise. Watch what happens to those who refuse. The narrative continues, detailing the increasing persecution of those who resist, the spiritual warfare taking place behind the scenes, and the profound choice each person must make. The transition back was like being struck by lightning. One moment I was with Jesus, witnessing those haunting visions, and the next, pain. So much pain. Every nerve ending screamed as my consciousness slammed back into my broken body. The sterile hospital lights seemed harsh and artificial after the divine radiance I'd experienced. She's back, someone shouted. BP rising, heart rate stabilizing. The voices around me sounded muffled, distant, like I was hearing them through water. My chest burned from CPR compressions. Every breath felt like inhaling fire, but none of that physical pain compared to the emotional anguish of separation, being torn away from his presence, from that perfect love and understanding. Mrs. Mitchell, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me. I managed a weak squeeze, tears streaming down my face, not from the pain, but from the weight of everything I'd witnessed. How could I possibly convey what I'd seen? Who would believe me? The next few days in the hospital were a blur of tests, medications, and concerned visitors. Tom barely left my side, his face etched with worry lines I'd never noticed before. The kids came after school, trying to act normal, but clearly shaken by how close they'd come to losing their mom. I wanted to tell them everything, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you tell your family that you've seen the future? And it's more terrifying than they could imagine. But I couldn't stay silent. Jesus' words echoed in my mind. You must share what you've seen. So I started small. I told Tom first. Late one night, when the hospital was quiet, he listened without interrupting, holding my hand as I described everything. The accident, meeting Jesus, the visions of what's coming. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. I believe you, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't understand it all, but I believe you. During my recovery, I started noticing things in the news that confirmed what I'd seen. Small things at first. New biometric payment systems being tested. Chip implants for medical records. Churches adopting digital giving platforms. Each development was presented as progress, as convenience, as the natural evolution of technology. But now I could see the darker pattern emerging. The doctors called my recovery miraculous. 6 weeks after the accident, I was back at work in the ER. Everything looked the same, but I was different. How could I not be? Every time I saw someone check their phone or make a digital payment, I thought about what was coming. Every time I heard people talking excitedly about new technology, I wanted to grab them by the shoulders and warn them. That's why I'm sharing this story now. Not because I want attention. Believe me, I'd rather keep quiet and pretend none of this happened. I'm sharing it because Jesus showed me what's coming, and He commanded me to warn others. You might not believe me. Jesus told me many wouldn't, but for those who have ears to hear, please listen. What's coming will seem good. It will seem logical, necessary, even righteous. The deception will be so subtle, so gradual, that unless you're firmly grounded in truth, you won't even recognize it. The time to prepare isn't when the crisis hits. It's now. The time to decide whom you'll serve, whom you'll trust, isn't when you're facing pressure to conform. It's now. Stay close to Jesus. Not religion, not tradition, not what's popular or convenient. Jesus Himself. Learn to recognize His voice now, while you still can, because a time is coming when the choice will be final and eternal, and no convenience, no security, no comfort is worth losing your connection to God forever. I still have nightmares about what I saw. I still wake up in cold sweats, remembering those souls who could no longer hear God's voice. But I also remember the love in Jesus' eyes, His compassion even for those who would reject Him. That's why I can't stay silent. That's why I have to warn you, even if you think I'm crazy. Because one day, sooner than any of us want to believe, you'll face a choice. And when that day comes, I pray you'll remember this story. I pray you'll remember that sometimes the most dangerous deception comes wrapped in the most attractive package. And I pray you'll choose wisely, because eternity hangs in the balance.